tous mes amis, confrères, consoeurs, je suis très content d'être ici avec vous ce matin. On m'a dit que c'est une très bonne conseil, vous avez eu des bonnes discussions et vous êtes en train de préparer le terrain pour une grande victoire pendant la prochaine élection. I spoke to your council, we were in the preparatory period for a certain election in Nova Scotia, and we came through that election and formed the first new Democratic Party government in Atlantic Canada. And of course, Darrell Dexter and his team have come in, and the very first thing they did virtually was to take the HST off home heating. And they established hard caps for coal-fired electricity. Et dans les partiels qu'on a eu, on a eu 4 partiels il y a 2 semaines et les résultats étaient très intéressants. In Quebec, in the 2 by-elections, we did very well. In fact, we have supplanted the Liberal Party as the choice for federalism. And in Nova Scotia, we have supplanted all other parties as the alternative to the Harper Conservatives in rural Nova Scotia as well. And then in British Columbia, where the election was fundamentally about the HST, we elected a new member of Parliament by the name of Finn Donnelly. I love his name. Here's a man who, he was a marathon swimmer at the national level, and he decided that one way to draw attention to the environmental crisis facing the rivers and the fishery, the wild salmon in British Columbia, would be to swim the entire length of the Fraser River. Now, I don't know how many of you know your geography. The Fraser River is 1,400 kilometers long. That's like swimming across the English Channel, which used to be the big deal, about 50 times. It's really quite an extraordinary achievement. And the water is a hell of a lot colder than the English Channel because it comes from snow and ice, and it's 3 degrees centigrade at the start. Anyway, he swam the entire length of it and began to raise awareness, and then he swam it again 10 years later, and when the Conservatives thought they had a chance of beating Finn Donnelly, they didn't know what they were up against. Finn Donnelly is replacing Don Black. Now, Don Black was the first person on the first day of sitting of the Parliament that was elected in 2006 to raise as a question of the government what is happening to the detainees that are being transferred to the Afghan prisons. They risk being She was instantly attacked by the front benches of the Conservative Party and called a Taliban lover, and every kind of insult was hurled in her direction. Well, here we are 3 years later, and we see exactly the same behavior by the Conservative government. And that is why the New Democratic Party of Canada has called for a judicial inquiry into what has gone on with the This story, by the way, is being covered around the world. People all over the planet are reading about how Canadian soldiers were transferring these prisoners. Now, you know, our soldiers, our men and women who serve in our armed services, they do what they're told. Where was the leadership? Where was the direction? Why was it that Canada was making these kinds of transfers in the first place? And I can tell you that our reputation globally as a defender of human rights has just taken a great big hit. At the same time as our reputation globally as a voice for peace took a hit when we found ourselves following along the George Bush policies in Afghanistan in the first place. And that's why it continues to be the case that we should be bringing our troops home and building également notre réputation sur la scène internationale par rapport à l'environnement est sous attaque. Nous ne sommes pas chefs de file. Nous sommes en arrière de toute la gang par rapport à la crise des changements climatiques. What Canadian, other than the Prime Minister and his team there, would have said to themselves it would be acceptable for Canada to be at the back of the pack when it comes to dealing with the climate crisis? I haven't met any of them. Canadians want to be in the forefront on environmental issues. You know, if you think of the defining characteristics of this country, one of them is the stunning environment for which we are to be the stewards. The length and breadth of this country is filled with beauty that is just unimaginable for most people in the world. With open spaces, with ecosystems that are as extraordinary as life itself. And it's our job to be the stewards for that environment. Not just for ourselves and for our own health in the immediate, but for future generations. You know, I've just become a grandfather. I'm now Grandpa Jack. You can call me Grandpa Jack. I'm named after my own Grandpa Jack, who I love dearly, and who bought me my first subscription at the age of 8 to Canadian Geographic. And by the way, we now have the editor of Canadian Geographic, Rick Boychuk. The last 15 years he's been editing that magazine. He's now our Director of Communications for our federal party. It was a magazine that captured what a lot of Canadians believe is our mandate as a Canadian people, which is to understand the environmental issues that we're dealing with and to be at the forefront of solutions. Right now, Canada is being attacked around the world for having fallen to the back of the pack. There's an essay by Tim Flannery, the author of The Weathermakers, who you may recall spoke at our convention in Quebec City 3.5 years ago, calling for action on climate change. In fact, as a result of his speech, we decided to prepare a piece of legislation that would put Canada in the forefront of the world in establishing targets for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And we went to the finest minds in the country. Peter Tabbins was helping me on that project. And we went to the David Suzuki Foundation and the Pembina Institute, and we said, what does science tell us should be Canada's targets? And let's put that in law. Well, that bill was presented in the House of Commons, and it was adopted by a majority of the members of Parliament all the way through to including third reading, and it was in the Senate when Stephen Harper called the election. And the result was it never got a chance to be signed by the Governor-General. But when it passed the House of Commons, Canada was the first elected legislature in the world to adopt the deep reduction targets that everybody's talking about in Copenhagen.